I never really trusted my instincts until that moment, when a child who was said to be born mute stood up in the silence of the kitchen and whispered 7 words that turned my whole life upside down. I thought I was just doing my in-laws a simple favor. But the way she looked at me, spoke with that shaky but clear voice, I knew there was no turning back. My name is Isabella. I'm 31 years old, a middle school teacher living in Spokane, Washington. My husband, Nathan, and I have been married for nearly 4 years. He's kind and capable, but he always chooses silence whenever his family crosses a line with me. I've gotten used to being brushed aside by my in-laws, but it was nothing like anything I'd dealt with before. If you've ever had to choose between your dignity and your family, leave a comment, hit like, share this story, and follow the channel so you won't miss what's coming next. It all started on a Friday afternoon in March. I had just stepped out of a parent-teacher conference when I got a call from my mother-in-law, Cynthia. She didn't ask if I was available or explain much, just, "Isabella, you'll stay with little Sophie for me. We're flying out Monday." I froze right outside the school. Sophie is Nathan's niece, his sister Meredith's daughter. She's 8 years old, and according to the family, she has a congenital neurological disorder. She doesn't speak or walk. During family gatherings, she always sits in a wheelchair, eyes fixed on something invisible. Not crying, not laughing, not reacting. "What about her nurse?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're all off. They either want sky-high pay or don't do anything right. Honestly, only family can be trusted. Besides, Nathan already agreed. You two will stay at the main house. There's a private guest room. Everything you need is there." I hung up while her voice was still echoing in my ear. When I got home and asked Nathan, he nodded, looking a little guilty. "Just 2 weeks," he said. "You've got spring break anyway, and if we say no, Dad's gonna be upset." That last part told me all I needed to know. He didn't want to upset his parents. I didn't want to argue, so I nodded, telling myself 2 weeks would go by quickly. The main house was perched on a hill overlooking the Spokane Valley, a massive estate with vaulted wood ceilings and tall windows framing a pine forest. Everything was neat, perfect, and cold. That night, Meredith quickly ran me through Sophie's care, handed me a thick binder, then disappeared upstairs to pack. 3 doses of meds a day. If you stay on time, she's more manageable, she said, like she was talking about a piece of equipment. Nothing special with food. Call her doctor if anything happens, but you probably won't need to. I looked back at Sophie. She was sitting quietly by the window, eyes fixed on the distant mountains. No one said goodbye to her. No one touched her. When they all left the next morning, I was the only one left, standing in the cavernous foyer with her. So quiet, even our breathing echoed. Nathan gave me one last hug. "I've got meetings with Dad in Santa Barbara. Might wrap up early. You okay?" I didn't answer, just nodded. When the door closed, I turned to Sophie and exhaled. "Looks like it's just the 2 of us now." I wheeled her into the family room, put on a soft cartoon, and went to the kitchen. The binder said 6 o'clock, medicine, then pre-blended nutritional shake. I called out casually, not expecting anything. "I'm just making dinner. Let me know if you need anything." I wasn't sure what I expected, but something felt off. The way she'd looked at me, focused, not empty, like she was listening. Their kitchen was large and spotless. I felt guilty even opening drawers. I made a simple pasta for myself, warmed her shake, and set out her meds exactly as the guide said. While stirring the sauce, a chill crept up my spine. Someone was watching me. I turned around. The wheelchair was empty. Sophie was standing at the doorway, legs trembling slightly, one hand gripping the frame, eyes locked on mine. I froze, still holding the wooden spoon. Her voice came out raspy but clear, one word at a time. "They want to take $4 million from me?" Everything stopped. The spoon hit the tile with a sharp clatter. I crouched down, afraid to move too fast. Sophie was still there, cheeks flushed with effort, hands gripping the door frame. Her legs wobbled, but held. Her gaze never left mine. "Sophie," I whispered, barely making a sound. She nodded, lips pressed together. She knew what she'd done, and what it might cost her. I crept closer and lowered myself to her eye level. It was only a few steps, but it felt like walking into another world. A part of me wanted to call Nathan right away. Another part just kept repeating, "Stay calm, stay calm." "Did you say someone wants your money?" I asked slowly, eyes locked on hers. She didn't answer right away. Then, after a glance behind her, she whispered, "Mom and Grandma and Grandpa. They pretend I'm sick to keep the money. When I turn 18, they'll say I'm not smart enough to handle it." I swallowed hard. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The kitchen, once still, now felt suffocating. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, unable to hide the tremble in my throat. She stared at me a long time, then said softly, "Because you look at me, not like them. You don't avoid my eyes. I think maybe you're the only one who doesn't believe I'm really sick." I lowered my head and gently touched her arm. Her skin was cold. Her hand was rough, fingernails a little dirty, like no one had bothered with the small things. "Are you in pain?" I asked. My teacher instincts kicked in. "If I don't take the pills? Not really. Just dizzy when I stand." I looked up, remembering the bottle in her jacket pocket. Small white pills, the name smudged. The note said, "May cause drowsiness. Take with food." I wasn't a pharmacist, but my gut screamed something was wrong. I helped her into the family room, sat her on the armchair, and brought her warm water. We sat in silence for a while. Then I asked, "How do you know about the money?" Sophie looked around, then tapped her forehead. "I taught myself to read. Mom leaves papers in her room. I read them. There's one that says the money's from Grandma and Grandpa on Dad's side." I remembered Meredith once saying the paternal side wasn't involved. Only the other side left something for Sophie. I hadn't thought much of it. "Do you still have those papers?" I asked. Sophie nodded. "Under the mattress, in my real room. Not the medical room on the first floor, but the one upstairs, where I sleep when no one's around." I checked the clock. It was close to 8 p.m. I had left the pasta sauce burning on the stove. I told her to rest, then pulled out my phone and took a photo of the pill bottle and its label. After that, I stepped into the room Meredith had once called the special care room. Every piece of equipment in there made my skin crawl, from the hospital bed and humidifier to the tiny camera mounted in the ceiling corner. There was even a microphone. All of it still running. I went back to the living room. "Are you being watched when you go upstairs?" Sophie nodded. "There's a camera in the room, but I know the spots where they can't see." They understood. We had to be careful. This was no longer a family matter. It was criminal. "Tomorrow, show me where you keep the papers. For now, you need to rest." She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Can you sleep in the living room, so I can call you if I need anything?" I nodded. I wasn't about to leave her alone anyway. I made up a small bed using floor cushions and a blanket in the living room. She stayed on the armchair. The one she claimed had no cameras. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about her eyes, an 8-year-old pretending to be ill just to survive. That little girl chose to trust me, even when I wasn't sure where to start. The next morning, as sunlight slipped through the kitchen window, I washed my face with cold water and stared at my reflection. The woman in the mirror wasn't just a teacher hoping for peace anymore. I was in this now, and I had to see it through. I had no idea Sophie was still hiding something bigger than everything she had already told me. The morning inside the Montgomery estate was colder than I expected. The air felt frozen, even though sunlight had begun to filter through the thick glass windows. Sophie sat quietly on the chair by the fireplace, cradling the mug of hot cocoa I'd made. Her face tilted slightly, eyes watching the garden, like she was memorizing every branch, every leftover patch of snow. "Are you ready?" she asked, voice soft but steady. I nodded, tightened the belt of my sweater, and followed her upstairs. She walked slowly, each stair like a small mountain. I stayed behind her, alert to any faint sound from the other rooms. The house was supposed to be empty while the family was away, but I still had the strange feeling someone or something was watching. Maybe it was the cameras. Or maybe it was just how long Sophie had been under surveillance, and how that fear seeped into every move she made. Her real room was at the far end of the second-floor hallway. The door was off-white, with a small wooden plaque hanging from the knob that read in silver ink, "Private, do not disturb." She opened it without a key. The room looked nothing like the medical setup downstairs. There were wallpaper skies, low bookshelves, a small bed with a blue knit blanket, and a stuffed animal tucked near the pillow, but there were no signs of an actual 8-year-old living there. Everything was too neat, too still. Sophie bent down, pulled up the mattress, and took out a faded silver tin box. Inside were a torn notebook, a few folded papers, and a flash drive. "It's all here," she said, hand trembling slightly as she handed it to me. I sat on the carpet, turned on the desk lamp, and started going through each paper. There was a photocopy of a will listing Sophie's maternal grandparents, Richard and June Whitaker, as having left her a $4 million inheritance after a car accident. It was notarized, dated 3 months after she was born. Next were several printed bank statements, a trust account in Sophie's name with Meredith as guardian. All of it looked legal, but one section made my stomach twist. Recurring expenses, several $1,000s a month, marked as for specialized medication and in-home care equipment. I glanced at Sophie. She was still sitting beside the bed, hands clasped together. "How did you get these?" "Mom leaves papers in the office. She doesn't lock it well. I read when I can." "When did you learn to read?" "Since I was 5, before they gave me the medicine." Her tone was calm, but her eyes weren't. I could see the quiet defiance in every word, resistance that had gone on far too long. I plugged the flash drive into my tablet. It held short video clips, Sophie running through a flower garden, her laughter ringing out, Sophie learning the alphabet with someone, maybe a former nanny, Sophie laughing, talking, falling and getting up on her own. I stopped watching when my throat started burning. What I saw wasn't a neurologically impaired child. It was a perfectly developing little girl, until something, somewhere, cut it all short. "How did you keep these videos?" "Mom thought the USB was empty. I copied them from the old laptop before she deleted them." The precision and calm of an 8-year-old girl. It was hard to grasp, but I didn't doubt her anymore. I reached out and gently touched the back of her hand. "You did really well." Sophie pressed her lips together. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. I knew I had to check Meredith's office. Sophie took me through a back hallway where there were fewer cameras. The office was staged like a showroom, walnut desk, high-end leather chair, abstract art hanging slightly off-center. "I think the file cabinet key is under the potted plant," Sophie whispered. I tried, and sure enough, a tiny key fell out when I lifted the pot. I opened the drawer and found dozens of documents. Prescriptions for strong sedatives, medical records, updated when Sophie was 3. Testimonials from family doctors, none of whom anyone outside the Montgomerys could afford. One folder labeled Plan 18 caught my eye. Inside were emails between Meredith and someone named Edward, likely the family's private attorney. The content discussed preparing medical and psychiatric records so that, when Sophie turned 18, they could petition the court to declare her legally incapacitated. I tucked everything into the canvas bag and looked back at Sophie. "We need to back all this up." She nodded, her face set with determination. We returned downstairs as dusk settled in. I flipped on the kitchen lights and started preparing dinner for both of us. Sophie stood at the table, slicing carrots with a small plastic knife. It was the first time I'd seen her move like an ordinary kid. I doubted anyone had ever trusted her with a knife before. "My mom always said, Miss Isabella," she said as I stirred the soup. "Yeah? If they find out I can walk, what will they do?" I stopped stirring and looked her straight in the eyes. "I won't let that happen." I said it more to myself than to her, but deep down I knew this wouldn't be resolved quietly. Someone was going to face consequences. I just didn't know when they were coming back, and I wasn't sure if I had enough time. I I sat in the living room, laptop on my lap, staring at the phone's contact list. Outside the window, light rain drizzled onto the backyard lawn. Late spring in Spokane was still chilly and damp, the kind of air that clung to your chest and made everything feel heavier. I had already packed all the documents in a waterproof pouch and backed up every scanned file onto 2 hard drives, one hidden in my suitcase, the other temporarily stashed under the downstairs kitchen sink. The USB was still in the pocket of my coat, right next to my wallet and phone. I was doing everything I could to keep things tidy and within reach. Sophie was lying on the couch, knees bent, legs swaying slightly as she read. She was holding a vintage picture book I'd taken from the second-floor shelf. Dense paragraphs, small print, long sentences. Still, she read with focus. Her lips moved softly, following each line. No more blank stares, no more drifting eyes. Just a child being herself. I turned back to the screen. My finger hovered over Lauren's number. My old college roommate, now a child advocacy lawyer in Seattle. We didn't talk often, but she'd always shown up when it mattered. I hit call. Jess, you're calling at this hour? Something's wrong. Her voice was instantly familiar, edged with concern. I took a breath. It's Isa. Something urgent, really urgent. I didn't dance around it. I told her everything. How I'd been cornered into watching Sophie the moment the girl stood up and mentioned a $4 million trust, and what we'd found in Meredith's office. There was a long silence on the other end. Isabella, are you saying they faked a child's illness to control her assets? Lauren's voice dropped. Not just faked it, they drugged her, made her act. There are cameras, fabricated records, even a plan to get her declared mentally unfit when she turns 18. I heard her typing. Lauren was already taking notes. Approved. I do. Videos, documents, emails, medication, Sophie's own testimony. She taught herself to read, copied papers, hid everything for years. Lauren exhaled sharply. Where are you right now? The Montgomery estate. About a 15-minute drive from downtown Spokane. You're there alone with her? Yeah. Nathan's away with his parents, said they're on a work retreat thing. 2 weeks. No one suspects you're onto them? Not yet. I'm pretending to give her the meds. Sophie knows how to play along. Theron paused, then said firmly, Good. First thing, back up everything. You've got a scanner? External drives? Yes. Already on it. Second, do not confront them directly. They've got money, lawyers, connections. You've got the truth, but it needs to be presented the right way. I nodded, even though she couldn't see. Got it. Third, you'll need someone ready to step in if this turns fast. Can you do that? I looked over at Sophie. She had lifted her head, her eyes steady and unblinking. I knew if I stepped back, she'd have no one. Yeah. Lauren pressed on. For now, don't call Nathan, don't text him. If he believed you, he'd have spoken up from the start. I clenched the phone. She was right. Nathan had stayed quiet. He'd said nothing when his mother mocked my job, or when Meredith made it clear I wasn't on their level. I couldn't rely on vague kindness from him anymore. You need to file for an emergency guardianship for Sophie, Lauren continued. You'll have to sign as her temporary caregiver. My cousin works at Spokane Child Services. He can help, but I'll need original evidence, photos, certified copies. The sooner the better. How soon can it be done? If we file everything, maybe 3 days? But we need to be sure they don't return early. I bit my lip. They said 14 days. It's only been 3. Lauren hesitated. Have a backup plan. If they come home early, get her out immediately. Do you have a car? Yes, mine's in the garage, keys in the living room. Keep your phone charged. Don't leave her side, not even for a minute. I'll check in within 24 hours. Isabella, you're doing the right thing, but it's risky. If they find out, they may strike back. I took a slow breath. My knees trembled, even while sitting. Thank you. Her voice softened. I'll handle the legal side. You protect that girl. If anything shifts, Call. The call ended. I sat frozen for a moment, then looked at Sophie. She was quiet, eyes wide with worry. What's going on, miss? I shook my head and smiled gently. Nothing bad. I'm just figuring out how to keep you safe. She didn't respond, just set her book down and leaned into the pillow, as if she'd been holding herself strong long enough and was finally letting go. I glanced at the clock. 6 p.m. The sky outside was darkening, and a faint fog crept past the windows. There were still too many unknowns pressing on my chest, but one thing had become absolutely clear. I couldn't walk away from this. That morning, I woke earlier than usual, lying still beneath the thin blanket, listening to the soft patter of rain tapping the skylight above the porch. Sophie was still asleep, her face relaxed, one hand resting gently on her belly, fingers curled loosely around her pajama hem. I watched her for a few quiet minutes before slipping out to the kitchen. I brewed coffee, checked my phone. No missed calls. Nothing from Lauren yet. I figured she was buried in paperwork. While the water heated, I stepped into Sophie's room, opened the medicine cabinet, and stared down at the bottle. 3 pale tablets dropped into my palm. Meredith's instructions had been 2 pills in the morning, 1 in the evening. But Sophie hadn't taken any of them for days now. I turned on the faucet and watched the pills swirl down the drain. The feeling was always strange, a mix of relief and like I was breaking a rule. I knew full well that if anyone in Nathan's family found out, they'd twist it into willful endangerment of a patient. Sophie woke up around 8 a.m. Her hair was slightly tousled, eyes still tinged with red, but her face looked rosier than it had in days. She walked into the kitchen on her own, sat at the table and asked, like a habit just forming, "Did you make hot chocolate yet?" I placed the mug in front of her and smiled. "Even got some cookies left over from yesterday." Sophie took a bite and chewed slowly. I sat across from her. "How do you feel today?" "No sore legs, no dizziness." She looked up, her eyes clearer. "I remember everything from last night's reading, too." I let out a quiet breath. It was clear that taking her off the meds was helping her regain some of her awareness. "So what should we do today?" I asked. "I think we should check Mrs. Cynthia's room. There were some files you said we still hadn't found. Do you remember the cabinet behind the piano? She used to keep it locked. Do you know where the key might be?" Sophie thought for a moment, tapping her spoon lightly against the cup. "Mom once took it from her robe pocket. She usually hung her robe near the living room." We waited until noon to go upstairs. I used the excuse of playing music in the living room to cover the sounds of rummaging. The robe was hanging just behind the entryway door, and after a few minutes of searching, I found a small keyring in the lining of the pocket. No labels, but a couple of them had that horizontal notch, typical for high-end wooden cabinets. Cynthia's file cabinet was tucked behind the piano, flush against the west wall. I tested the keys one by one. The third one turned, and the door creaked open. Inside were a few folders, some notebooks, and a small steel box with a combination lock. I laid everything out on the table and started flipping through. The first document was a list of charitable expenses, complete with names of organizations, amounts, dates, and strange notes like Lily, congenital condition, image used, Lily, featured at winter fundraiser, community response, Lily, Scottsdale conference sponsorship, positive impression. I looked at Sophie. She stood silently at the table, expression unreadable, her fingers gently gripping her sleeve. "They used you for donations," I said softly. "I know," Sophie whispered. "I saw my picture on flyers, even though no one told me." I flipped through a few more pages. There were contracts with event planners, design invoices for posters featuring Sophie in a wheelchair, eyes distant, hair down, legs covered with a blanket. A photo staged perfectly for pity. I placed my hand on the steel box. "Any guesses on the code?" Sophie stepped closer and studied the number pad. "Maybe my mom's birthday?" I tried. No luck. The wedding date? Still locked. What was special to her? Sophie thought. She once said the day her cat Mabel died was the saddest day of her life. I paused. "Do you remember the date?" May 14th, it was written on the picture frame. I punched in 1405, clicked. Inside was a bundle of foil-wrapped papers, a brown leather notebook, and a stack of small files. The notebook held Cynthia's handwritten notes, therapy timelines, doctor names, medication lists, and even mentions of having to pause fundraising when Sophie looked too alert. There was a note that read, "Maintain original dosage until the 18 plan is complete. Hand over full authority to Meredith. In case Jessica interferes, review Nathan's prenup." I sat frozen, heart thudding like stone. They hadn't just used Sophie. They'd planned for me, too. I carefully photographed everything, packed it up, and locked the cabinet again. Sophie held my hand as we left the room. Her palm was cold, but her grip was firm. That night, we curled up on the couch, a thick blanket wrapped around us both. Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I don't know why you're helping me, but I'm really grateful." I wrapped my arm around her, eyes drifting to the window. The rain had stopped and the sky was clearing. I still didn't know how I'd handle it if Nathan came home early, but I knew one thing. If he chose their side, I wouldn't stand with him. The call came just as I thought maybe we'd have one quiet day. My phone buzzed as I folded Sophie's clothes into a small travel bag. Just a few outfits, a book, some old photos she'd kept since she was 3, and the backup hard drive I'd hidden inside the lining. I planned to keep it beside the bed, ready, just in case. The screen lit up. "Nathan." I froze, fingers tightening around the phone. It felt like someone had flung open a window in midwinter. I answered. "Isabella?" "Yes, it's me." "We're all good. The meeting ended earlier than expected. My parents want to come back to Spokane ahead of schedule. Could be tonight or tomorrow." I paused. "Coming back early?" My voice felt dry. "Yeah. Mom said she misses Sophie. She wants to check on a few things. Oh, and Dad wants to take me to meet with a client in Boise, so we shuffled the calendar." I tried to keep my tone steady. "Nathan, if they come back without warning, I'm not sure Sophie will be okay." He hesitated. "What do you mean?" I stepped out onto the balcony, the glass door clicking shut behind me. "I don't think she needs that medication anymore. I think they're doing something wrong." Nathan let out a soft laugh, but it wasn't amused. "Isabella, you're not a doctor, and neither are they. But I have proof. I have documents, records, even videos from before they started faking her illness." Silence stretched long on the line. "Nathan, I hate to even say this, but have you ever wondered, why has she never been enrolled in school, even though she's 8? Why are there cameras in her bedroom?" "You're exaggerating. Mom and Meredith have done everything for her." "No, they've done it for money. And deep down, you know that." His breathing grew heavier on the other end. "I don't believe you." I leaned back against the railing. "You don't have to. But you should know. I've called an attorney. I've reached out to CPS. If you choose to side with them, I won't be here when you get back." The call ended without another word. I stood there for a long while before heading back inside. Sophie was painting with the watercolor set I'd found in the storage closet. When she looked up at me, I simply smiled. "We'll need to get ready to leave sooner than planned." She nodded, no questions asked. I carefully filed the documents into a folder, zipped the hard drive into the lining of my coat, and hid it deep under the couch cushions. The original plan was to wait 3 days for Lauren to secure an emergency guardianship order, but if they came back tonight, I needed a way out, fast. Around 5 p.m., just as I was about to start dinner, the gate sensor lit up. A gray SUV pulled into the driveway, tires squealing slightly from a sharp brake. I froze in the kitchen. Sophie rushed to me, grabbing my hand, her nails pressing lightly into my skin. "Auntie." I nodded. "Come with me." We moved quickly to the downstairs medical room. I turned on the fake ventilator, helped Sophie into bed, pulled the blanket up to her waist, and gave her a wink. She closed her eyes, hands folded neatly over her stomach. I had just stepped into the living room when the front door swung open. Cynthia entered first, fur coat, deep red lipstick, eyes scanning the house like she expected something to be out of place. "Bit earlier than expected," she said casually. I smiled. I was just about to start dinner. "How is she?" "Stable, following the med schedule. Eating and sleeping on time. And her evening dose?" "Already given." She gave a slight nod, then turned toward the hallway. "Meredith, go check her room." My fingers clenched slightly. Meredith's voice called from upstairs. "3 doses missing. The medicine cabinet looks disturbed." "Probably dropped one while cleaning," I said before she could press further. Robert, my father-in-law, came in last, heavy coat still on, holding a travel coffee cup. His eyes met mine for barely 2 seconds before shifting toward the kitchen. I was walking a tightrope. They suspected something, but they didn't have proof. If you've ever stayed silent because no one believed you, or been blamed just for speaking the truth, leave a comment. Share this story if you believe someone out there needs to hear it. That night, Meredith went into Sophie's room. I stood outside the door, listening to the scrape of a chair, then her low, even voice. "Sophie, you're not reacting anymore, right? Good girl." I gripped the doorknob, heart pounding. "Tomorrow someone's coming to evaluate you. A doctor. You have to stay quiet. If you say anything wrong, you know what happens." No response. I couldn't tell if Sophie was scared or just following the plan. Meredith stepped out, her eyes slicing past me. "What exactly have you been doing while I was gone?" I followed instructions. "You're welcome to check the logs." "We will," she replied, then walked off. I checked the time. It was nearly 9 p.m. I had to act that night, but someone beat me to it. I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of a door creaking open downstairs, so faint I might have ignored it, except for the footsteps on wood, the whisper of air through the door just as it was pulled shut, and the chill that ran down my spine told me it was real. I shot up from the sofa, still in pajamas, phone in hand. I moved through the house in the dark, careful not to make a sound. As I passed the hallway, I noticed a dim light coming from the medical room, where Sophie was pretending to sleep. I pressed against the wall and peeked in. Meredith was standing beside Sophie's bed, holding a small syringe. Her movements were slow and cold, like she wasn't in any hurry. I couldn't make out the liquid inside, but instinct told me it wasn't part of any normal treatment. "Sophie," she whispered, "wake up. I've got something that'll help you sleep. The doctor's coming in the morning. You don't want to be all achy before that, right?" Sophie didn't move, no reaction. Just like we'd practiced. I didn't hesitate. I stepped into the room, my voice firm but controlled. "Meredith, what are you doing?" She jolted and turned, hiding the syringe behind her back. I was just checking on her. She looked pale. "And the syringe?" I took another step closer, eyes locked on her hand. "What exactly were you about to inject into a sleeping child?" "I'm her mother. I have every right to care for her," she said, voice rising. "No, you don't have the right to harm her, not again." I stood between her and the bed. "I've contacted lawyers. I've documented everything you people have done." She backed up half a step, eyes still fixed on me. "I'm not afraid of you," she snapped. "You're just an outsider." "An outsider," I repeated. "The outsider who stopped you from drugging your daughter in the middle of the night." Footsteps echoed in the hall. I turned. Robert appeared in his robe, half-buttoned, eyes narrowed. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice groggy but sharp. I looked him straight in the eye. "I just caught Meredith about to inject something into Sophie. No prescription, no medical justification." Robert glanced at Meredith, then turned back to me. "You're making accusations," he said slowly. "What are you really doing here? Trying to set us up for a lawsuit?" "I'm here because your granddaughter's being emotionally abused, and you're trying to cover it up with money." "Who do you think will believe you? Who are you in this family? A public school teacher who married into money and now thinks she has the right to judge us?" His face flushed, voice rising. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. "This conversation's been recorded since I walked in. I photographed the syringe, and the room's camera, unless you've had time to wipe it, caught everything." Robert froze. "You I've backed it all up to the cloud, and I'm not alone. I glanced down at Sophie. She was still lying still, but I saw her fingers clutch the blanket. The three of us stood in silence for a few seconds. The air felt thick. "We'll talk again in the morning," Robert said, then turned and walked off. Meredith tossed the syringe into the sink, then followed her father without another word. I knelt beside Sophie. "It's okay now. You're safe." She opened her eyes, tears beading on her lashes. "I was scared." "I know, but you did great." I picked up my phone and quickly texted Lauren. "They made a move. We need to act sooner." Then I sat there, still holding Sophie's hand, waiting for daylight. That morning, soft sunlight slipped through the sheer curtains, casting a pale glow across the cold wooden floor. I hadn't slept. Sophie had dozed off after the long night. I stayed at the edge of the bed, phone in hand, waiting for word from Lauren. The sound of a car pulling up startled me. I rushed to the hallway window. Nathan's silver sedan had just turned into the driveway. He stepped out, shirt wrinkled, hair messy, but eyes alert. Cynthia was with him, as polished as ever, not a smear in her lipstick. I straightened, took a deep breath, and walked downstairs. As the door opened, Nathan looked at me, his eyes struggling to mask uncertainty. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes," I replied. "But it's not just between us anymore." Cynthia stepped forward, her voice soft but pointed. "I hope whatever you stirred up last night didn't harm the child." I looked her in the eye. "Your daughter nearly injected something unknown into Sophie at 3 a.m. That's not just harmful, it's dangerous." Nathan stepped in between us. "Let's not start the morning like this. Do you have proof?" I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and opened a shared folder. "It's all here. Room footage, syringe photos, medication logs, unprescribed meds, and if you really want to know more, I have copies of the trust documents and their planned psych evaluation timeline for when Sophie turns 18. Cynthia paled. Nathan stood still. No defense, no excuses. "Do you understand what they were doing to her?" I asked. "Have you ever seen the real Sophie? Not the child forced to lie still. The one who could read at 5, do math in her head, recall the exact date your cat died, and who still dreams of going to school." Nathan swallowed hard. I didn't know it was this bad." "No, you didn't want to know." He took a half step back, his gaze dropping. "Lauren's on her way, with CPS and local police. If your family wants to deny this, the courts will handle it." "Jessica," Cynthia began. "Isabella," I corrected. "I'm no longer the quiet daughter-in-law at your dinner table. Today, I stand with Sophie." She said nothing more. Her eyes flickered with something close to panic before she turned and went upstairs. Nathan stayed rooted in place, then exhaled. "I need to see her." I nodded. "That's up to her." Sophie was awake. I told her Nathan wanted to see her. She nodded and carefully sat up, placing her hands on her knees. When Nathan entered, she didn't turn away. She looked him straight in the eye, calmer than I'd expected. I still remember you," Sophie said softly. "You used to sneak me cookies when Mom wasn't home." Nathan gave a crooked smile. "I remember. I didn't think it'd turn out like this." "I don't want anyone to hate each other," Sophie replied. "But I don't want to pretend anymore." I stood outside the door, heart slowing with every word she spoke. Nathan sat at the edge of the bed. "Are you scared?" "Yes, but I have Miss Isabella now." I heard him exhale. "I'm sorry." By late morning, Lauren arrived with a police officer and a CPS worker named Monique. We led them to Meredith's home office, showed them the files, hard drives, and footage. Lauren spoke only when needed. Monique was serious but patient, listening as Sophie explained things clearly. No one was arrested on the spot, but Robert, Cynthia, and Meredith were ordered not to leave the state. The trust assets were temporarily frozen. Sophie was taken to the hospital for a full medical evaluation, and I went with her. Nathan followed, silent until we sat in the hospital hallway. "Are you filing for temporary guardianship?" he asked. "I already submitted the paperwork. Lauren is the legal lead." I want to help. Then you'll need to prove it. I didn't say it with anger, just exhaustion. Too many sleepless nights, too many people to second guess. He didn't respond. But he didn't leave either. When the doctor confirmed Sophie was physically healthy, I looked at her. She gave a small smile, the first real one I'd seen in over a week. That night, Sophie and I slept in the family room at the quiet hospital. I held her close, my arm wrapped around her shoulders. Outside the window, Spokane was still scattered with rain, but I knew something inside this room had changed forever. I still couldn't tell if they had truly given up, but I knew the next battle would take place where they thrived most, the courtroom. 3 weeks after the initial investigation, Sophie and I moved into a small monthly rental house on the north side of Spokane. White walls, worn wooden floors, patches of snow still clinging in the backyard. But it was quiet enough for her to sleep through the night without turning to check the camera. Each morning, I brewed peppermint tea, Sophie poured milk over cereal, and we sat by the window watching the school bus drive by. She hadn't gone back to school yet. There were still medical files and psychological evaluations to complete, but the mornings no longer felt heavy like they had in the Montgomery estate. No more meds, no more commands, no more midnight footsteps sneaking through hallways. I returned to teaching part-time, running a writing skills class for high schoolers. Sophie was now working with a team of specialists to support her cognitive and emotional recovery. Her doctor said she might be academically advanced for her age, as long as she had the time and a stable environment. I used to think the hardest part was behind us, but it turned out that was just the calm before a different kind of storm. Legal. One Monday morning, Lauren arrived at the house carrying a thick file. She placed it on the dining table and tapped her finger on the folder's edge. "The lawsuit is officially underway," she said. "The courts agreed to consider transferring temporary guardianship to you." I sat down, still holding my tea. And their side? Robert hired a major law firm out of Portland. They're going to fight the transfer, saying you're not blood and have a history of overreacting. What about Cynthia? She's staying quiet publicly, but financial records from her charitable foundations are under investigation. I nodded slowly. Meredith? She still claims Sophie has a congenital neurological disorder, says you fabricated everything to damage the family's reputation. I let out a soft laugh, not amused, just weary. So she's going to deny all the footage, documents, and medical statements. They'll try to drag it out, stall everything, hoping you'll give up. I looked toward the living room, where Sophie was reading The Secret Garden under a patchwork blanket. The sunlight caught in her curls, brushing across her cheek. "I'm not giving up," I said. Lauren smiled. "Didn't think you would." The first hearing took place in Spokane County Court. A small courtroom, dark wood panels, low ceiling. I sat on the left, with Lauren beside me. Across the aisle sat Robert Meredith and a sharply dressed, middle-aged attorney in a shiny black suit. His name tag read E. Halbrook. Sophie didn't have to appear, I was relieved. She was still learning how to stand steady in the real world. She didn't need to face the people who had terrified her for half her childhood. Halbrook began with a monotone voice, asserting that Meredith was Sophie's legal mother and all caregiving actions were based on professional diagnoses. Lauren countered with files from the Central Hospital confirming Sophie was physically healthy, plus testimony from independent physicians citing overmedication and misuse. I didn't speak at first, but when my turn came, I looked straight at the judge and briefly explained how I came to care for Sophie. The moment she first said the 7 words that changed everything, and the way she looked at me each day since we left the mansion. The look of a child, beginning to believe she deserved to be real. By the end, the judge ruled to uphold my temporary guardianship until a final decision was made. Robert didn't react, quietly packing his documents. Meredith stormed out, eyes locked on nothing. We got home late in the afternoon. Sophie was already waiting on the steps, hugging her stuffed bear. "Did we win, miss?" she asked. "Not quite," I said, "but we still get to stay together." She smiled, then sat beside me on the porch step. "That's enough for me." I gave a small nod, watching her leap down onto the lawn, sweater flaring in the wind. What we'd been through, I'd never forget, but what lay ahead would decide everything. The official trial began on a chilly April morning, the sky a soft gray, just cold enough for me to wrap a scarf around my neck. I arrived early, Lauren said. Being early helped settle the nerves, but really, I just wanted a moment to breathe, to look at the white stone courthouse in the center of Spokane and feel something solid in the chaos. Sophie didn't come. She was at her speech therapy center with a team of specialists. This morning, before I left, she hugged me tight, then let go without saying a word. But I felt something settle in my chest, like she believed I would fight for her to the end. The courtroom that day was more crowded than I expected. There was a representative from the Child Protection Agency, a social worker carrying notes, and most surprisingly, Sophie's grandmother. Her name was Margaret, Meredith's mother. I had only met her once, a long time ago, before Sophie was old enough for school. Today, she sat in the back row, reserved for spectators, her silver hair neatly tied back, clutching a worn blue purse. Her eyes met mine briefly, then she nodded silently. Montgomery's lawyer Halbrook stuck to the old tactic, attacking my ability to care for Sophie, arguing that I was an outsider with no stable financial foundation. But this time, Lauren countered with a series of documents. Sophie's health certificates, testimony from therapists, and most notably, a recorded excerpt of Sophie speaking during a session with a psychologist. I want to live with Miss Bella. There are no medicines there, no crying in the belly. That last sentence quieted the room. I heard pens stop writing, chairs shift softly. Halbrook tried to challenge the recording's authenticity, but the judge ordered it to be kept for review. When it came time for closing statements, Margaret unexpectedly raised her hand. The judge allowed her to speak as a legal relative. She stood, her voice trembling but clear. I had no idea what my granddaughter was going through. Meredith never let me near her. I thought she was just shy, needing time, but I was wrong. If I could turn back time and do things differently, I would. But now, at least I can confirm, Isabella is the only person Sophie truly smiles about. I believe she deserves to be somewhere she feels safe. No one spoke after that. The silence was so complete I could hear the air conditioner humming overhead. That afternoon, the court ruled. I was granted legal guardianship until Sophie turned 18. The Montgomery family could file an appeal, but with the current evidence, the judge forbade Meredith from having direct contact with Sophie for at least 1 year. I left the courthouse, holding the official order, still smelling the fresh ink on the paper. Lauren hugged me tightly, then whispered, "You kept your promise." I just nodded. Inside, I didn't feel an explosion of relief or quiet calm, just a sense that something heavy had been set down, a burden, a responsibility, and a new commitment. Sophie waited for me at the door. When I handed her the paper, she didn't say a word, just gently touched the red stamp at the bottom and asked, "Does this mean I get to stay forever?" No one can take you away anymore. She looked out at the backyard, where late-blooming tulips poked through the ground after the long winter. She whispered, almost speaking to the flowers, "Then I'll plant the garden again, like you told me." I sat beside her, "And I'll bake apple pie. But this time, no one will make you take medicine afterward." She smiled, a soft, full smile. I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe in your car, before bed, or on a day when you need a story to remind you to stand up. If you've ever stood between love and silence, I understand. Tell me where you're listening from. And if you want to hear more honest journeys like this, don't forget to follow the channel because the next story might be just what you need. Isabella's story reminds us that sometimes the person who brings peace to a child isn't the one sharing their blood, but the one patient enough to listen and brave enough to stand up and protect. In the real world, there are many children like Sophie, silent from pain, and many people like Isabella, quietly choosing unconditional love. If we have the courage to trust our instincts and the strength to act, then sometimes a safe home doesn't need a family name, just the right kindness at the right time.